bias before it happens or correct it shortly after it does. So I'll be talking about both individual bias interrupters and organizational bias interrupters. Here's an example of organizational bias interrupters with respect to compensation. There you have the website address there. There's a whole toolkit there in interrupting bias in law firm partner compensation. And one of the very important things, if your firm, and most do, count origination credit, who brings a client into the firm, is to set up a way to settle disputes over origination credits and other forms of credit that lawyers can use without pushback, without people thinking that they're just complaining, without raising eyebrows. Okay, here is the first of the four basic types of gender bias. We call it tightrope, and you can see that 3/4 of women report it. It stems from prescriptive stereotypes. If there's research that shows that the good woman is expected to be nice and communal, helpful, modest, interpersonally sensitive, really a good team player. But the go-getter man is expected to be something quite different. He's expected to be competent and what's called agentic, direct, assertive, competitive, and ambitious, a real leader. Now, you would think these are really outdated stereotypes, but in fact, one study shows that they've actually increased in their hold in recent decades. So they haven't decreased, they've actually increased. And these prescriptive stereotypes have profound effects in today's workplace. Now, in the United States, this is a very, very famous case. It's an old case from no, not that old, from 1989, called Pricewaterhouse versus Hopkins. And in it, the Supreme Court recognized that gender stereotyping is gender discrimination. So tightrope stereotyping is gender discrimination. There, the plaintiff was denied partnership at Pricewaterhouse and told she should walk more femininely, talk more femininely, get her hairstyle, and go to charm school. In other words, you're not behaving femininely enough for our taste. The Supreme Court said that was sex discrimination. We are beyond the day when an employer could evaluate employees by assuming or insisting that they match the stereotype associated with their group. Here's how this tightrope bias plays out on the ground. Prescriptive bias is the technical name. One woman said, if you're stern or you say no, your immediate reaction is to call that woman a bitch, right? If you're a man, it's just a no. And one study found that 66% of women, but only 1% of men, got negative comments about their personalities on their performance evaluations. That was actually a study of tech. So here is a way that you can interrupt this kind of bias in your performance evaluations. It's really important in performance evaluations to separate personality issues from skill sets that need to be developed. And then you look at who has personality issues and you count. In one study, we found that over 90% of people of color had personality mentioned in their performance evaluations. So if you're not counting, this probably is happening not only by gender, but also by race. And then there's what I call the Hillary problem, Hillary Clinton problem. I seldom receive pushback when I behave assertively. You can see that about 2/3 of white men say yes, but less than half of women say yes. This is chiefly, again, a gender problem. And then the Serena Williams problem, who can express anger? I feel free to express anger at work when it's justified. 56% of white male lawyers said yes, but only 40% of the women of color. And again, white women, men of color, as usual, in between. How about self-promotion? I'm rewarded for self-promotion. 2/3 of white men say yes, but only about half of everyone else says yes. So here's a bias interrupter at an organizational level. if your firm uses self-evaluations as part of their evaluation process, there is an open access free worksheet called Writing an Effective Self-Evaluation that can help ensure that women and especially Asian Americans, but women of all races don't write a super modest evaluation, whereas white men write a much perkier evaluation. Another form of tightrope bias has to do with what we call the office housework. And the office housework is really four different things. First of all, it's literal housework, planning parties, cleaning the cups, administrative work, scheduling conference calls, filling in on a recruiting schedule to talk to a job candidate. Then emotion work, someone who is responsible for associate morale or the associate summer program, for example. And then finally, there's a split in every profession between what is the kind of glamour work that leads to promotion and what is the undervalued work that keeps the trains running, but no one's going to get promoted for. I talked to a partner here in Silicon Valley um, at a firm, a very well-known firm, and I said, do women partners do the office housework? And she knew immediately what I meant. And she said, sure. She was a litigator. She said, we do the task list. So here's the national data. I do more administrative tasks than my colleagues. You can see that only about a quarter of white men say yes, but again, about half of women say yes. So here's something you can do as an individual to interrupt bias. Say you suspect that women do more of the office housework, and if your firm or corporation hasn't had an initiative around this, they probably do. How can you find out if this is true, and how can you, as an individual, intervene? Well, there's actually on the Bias Interrupters website a open access survey. You can find out tomorrow who's doing the office housework if you send it around in your group or your company. And as an individual, here's how you can intervene. When you're staffing these administrative tasks, don't ask for volunteers, because if you do, women will be under strong informal pressure to volunteer, and men actually will be under strong informal pressures not to volunteer. He knows what's valued here. Also, do establish a rotation of for administrative work and literal housework, or assign it to support personnel. The national data also, we asked a question. I'm expected to be a worker bee who works hard and doesn't complain. 41% of white men said yes, but there was a 20 percentage point differential. Almost 2/3 of women of color said yes, with white women and men of color not far behind. So in many ways, what's happened in many law firms, certainly in the United States, and I suspect in Chile, is that women have been invited into the firms, but not given access to the work that leads to promotion, which is one of the reasons when women begin to leave around 4 or 5 years. Who's a leader? White men, as you can see, are seen as a leader more than any other group, which of course also leads to promotion. So that's the first pattern. The second is called prove it again. And you can see about 2/3 of women report it. It stems from lack of fit. Here's, if you ask women, if you ask lawyers, I have to prove myself more than my colleagues. About a quarter of white men say yes, but look, 2/3 of women of color say yes, and about half of men of color and white women. That's a big differential. Here's how it happens on the ground. Um, we've heard all of this in companies that we work with. We work with a lot of companies. I love her, but she's not ready for partnership. Now, because of Prove It Again, she may have to be proving herself 2 or 3 times, whereas white men are typically judged on their potential. They have to prove themselves once or maybe not at all. No one assumes you got promoted because you're the smartest person in the room, said another woman. This also happens with laterals. Male laterals are taken at their say-so. Female laterals have to show you they have a book of business. And laterals, of course, are people who didn't come up through the ranks, but rather entered as more senior lawyers. So here is an example of a bias interrupter to interrupt bias in hiring. Actually, in any selection or evaluation process, it's really important, the literature shows, to pre-commit to what's important, the specific competencies that you're looking for, and require everybody involved in the evaluation process just to give 2 or 3 pieces of evidence that this person does or lacks the specific competency, and then require accountability. Because one other effect of prove it again bias is that um, in groups, objective rules tend to be applied leniently to in groups, here men, and rigorously to out groups, here women. So if you've decided you need a specific requirement and it's waived, it's very important to keep track of when it's waived and look for demographic patterns. Look if it's being waived more for men than for women. This is another way Prove It Again plays out in everyday workplace interactions. That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Trigg. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. This is sometimes called mansplaining. Other people get credit for an idea I originally offered. Here's the data. Again, about 1/4 of white men say yes, but look, it's about half of women of all races say yes. And of course, if other people get credit for ideas you originally offered, you have to have twice as many ideas to get equal glory. So you're sitting in in a meeting and you see the stolen idea occur. How can you intervene? Well, a colleague of mine actually looked at the man who had taken her idea and she said, "Is there an echo in here?" But when she did that, she was general counsel of one of the largest corporations in the United States. That's not a strategy that most people are going to use because it spends too much political capital. Anyone, though, can use this strategy. I've been thinking about that idea ever since Pam first said it. You've added something important, Tim. Maybe here's the next step. Or you could lob it back and say, I wonder if Pan can riff off what you have said. And so the importance of individual bias interrupters is to give people the kinds of things that they can use and that don't require spending too much political capital. Okay, here's the third pattern. It's called the maternal wall. You can see it's less common. Only 59% of my original sample of mothers reported it, but it's really strong once triggered. This was again a matched resume study. One resume, but not the other. They were identical, except for one, but not the other, listed membership in the Parent Teachers Association. What they found was that the mother was nearly 80% less likely to be hired, only half as likely to be promoted, offered an average of $11,000 less in salary, and held to higher standards, both performance and punctuality standards. She could be late less. Here's the data. Um, uh, the question is, parenthood didn't harm my perceived competence. And about 80% of white men said yes. But look at the gender differential. Only about half of women said yes. So here are some metrics, and metrics are really important, keeping track of the numbers. And I don't mean just the numbers of women who are partners. I mean this kind of metrics that can show you, can pinpoint what's going wrong. Do women's performance evaluations ratings fall after they have children? Do employees' ratings fall after they take parental leave or adopt flexible work arrangements? Do parents returning from leave have access to career enhancing assignments? You should be keeping track of all of that. One of the things I learned from the prior section is that it's very unusual for men to be taking their parental leave. And if men at your firm are not taking their parental leave, you can be pretty sure that women who take it are encountering stigma and career stall. Here's the fourth pattern, the tug of war. That's when gender bias against women fuels conflicts among women. And you can see it's not as common. 55% of one sample reported it. Actually, 75% of another sample said things like this. The older women here are always very encouraging, very helpful, and very kind. So the tug of war does not always happen. But here's where the problems come in. Opportunities for women here are very zero sum. If one woman gets a prized position, another woman won't. And so it breeds a sense of competition. Um, the result is what we call strategic distancing. This was one of the few CEOs in Silicon Valley. A quote from her when she was still at Google. She said, "You know, I'm not a girl at Google. I'm a geek at Google." And you notice how adeptly she distances herself from the outgroup girls and aligns herself with the in-group geeks. So if work's a boys' club, sometimes women will join up and align against other women. Uh, and then there are these threat mechanisms, collective threat. If another woman performs poorly, I'll look bad. Um, Favoritism threat. If I support another woman, it'll look like I'm playing favorites, particularly in hiring or partnership decisions. Competitive threat. There's only room for one. So if she gets it, I won't. All of those things are reasons why women sometimes don't support each other. And it's a pass through of gender bias in the environment. Another way that tug of war often plays out that is rarely noted is that often men get a lot better administrative support than women do. You can see among lawyers on the right, I find it difficult to get administrative personnel to do the kinds of support work for me that they do for other lawyers. This is much more of a problem in law on the right than in engineering on the left. You can see about 1/3 of women say that this is true. And so women often are doing a lot more administrative work, not just because of the office housework phenomenon, but also because the admins don't support them in the way that they support the men. So does all of this matter? Yes, it has a big effect. The patterns of bias negatively correlate with belonging. So we've given this workplace experiences survey, of course, with to many different organizations. And in organizations with higher bias, they tend to have women reporting lower levels of belonging and less intent to stay. Again, people often say, well, women are leaving because they're having children, and they may be leaving because they're having children, and very few people think it's appropriate for a mother to be out of the house for 60 hours a week. That's why it's important to have non-stigmatized part-time policies and to allow people to work remote, both men and women. But the other reason women are leaving is because sorry, my mother-in-law is calling me, but she's not going to talk to me right this second. The other reason women are leaving is because they are not getting the kind of work that will really lead to partnership. So they figure, why am I sticking around? Um, so the bias interrupters model, which you've just seen, is evidence-based and it's driven by metrics. The metrics are really important to establish baselines so you can measure progress. And the bottom line is if an organization faces diversity and inclusion challenges, typically it's because these subtle forms of bias are constantly being transmitted at hiring. They're shaping who gets access to opportunities. They're shaping meetings day after day after day. They're shaping that outcome measure, that compensation that we figure differential that we saw at the beginning. But the good news is that small changes to interrupt the bias can have big effects. We're actually now doing 6 experiments inside companies in the United States to implement bias interrupters with support from Walmart.com. So we'll have a lot more data that will be reported in Harvard Business Review soon. The bottom line is that bad things happen to good people. Organizations that believe they are more meritocratic actually show more bias than organizations that don't. And people who believe they're colorblind show more racial bias than people who don't. And men actually evaluate gender bias research more negatively than women. So these are the ways that bias creeps in. But here's an example of a small tweak that had a big effect. There is, again, open access free on the web at the Bias Interrupters website, this simple 2-page document called Identifying and Interrupting Bias in Performance Evaluations. And in an experiment, we just read through out loud this 2-pager to people, and we found that it increased both bonuses and performance evaluations for white women, black women, and black men. And that takes less than 5 minutes and has a very concrete impact. We also have, in conjunction with another organization that we did an experiment in, a US law firm called Ice Miller, we have a very thorough attorney interview toolkit that walks you through in very concrete terms how to make sure your hiring function is not being distorted by bias. So the first step is to, again, as we said, pre-commit to what qualifications are important and require accountability. First, determine the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are essential for success in the role. And there's more on the website about how to do that. Then developed behavior-based interview questions to assess the candidate's knowledge, skills, and abilities. For example, tell me about a time you identified a problem with a process. What steps did you take to improve the situation? This is very important so that interviews don't basically become about what I call the lunch test or the tennis test. Would I like to have lunch with you, or do you play tennis? I love tennis. This is designed in a business-based way to actually identify the best candidates, which is the best way to interrupt bias. And then all candidates should be graded using the same rubric, the same criteria. And then finally, select the candidate with the highest overall rating. In one of the Walmart experiments that we're doing now, we found that white men were being hired when they had ratings of about 3.3, whereas, for example, women of color, in order to be hired, have to have ratings much, much higher than that in order to be hired. So if you aren't keeping track, this may well be happening. Here is, those are tools for hiring. There are also on the website tools for retention. First of all, metrics that you should be keeping. Are women, people of color, or other historically excluded groups leaving at higher rates than majority men? Analyze the data by years of employment and by role and level. Are these groups being promoted at lower rate than majority men? So keep those metrics and then conduct interviews with members of these groups if you find that women are are leaving at higher rates than men, to find out why they are leaving. Then, with data in hand, implement targeted bias interrupters. And again, there's lots of guidance for free on the website. So we also have a membership program called Women's Leadership Edge. And as part of that, we work with many law firms that, and we provide them with a lot of both general leadership training and also a diversity and inclusion training. And I wanted to mention in closing the leveling the playing field for first generation professionals, because like the United States, Chile has a very strong class system. And one experiment, in fact, in the United States, this was again a matched resume experiment. And these were both white men, but one of them was from an elite family and the other was not. And it found that the man from the elite family got 12 times the number of interview callbacks as the man with an identical resume, but not an elite family. So it's important to be thinking not only about gender, but also about social class. So thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor John Williams. This has been a very enlightening keynote. Well, thank you very much for everyone who has joined us today. I will be speaking in English or Spanish according to how comfortable I feel expressing my ideas. The same will do the other panelists here. This will be a very loose and open conversation. I will introduce the panel. We thank you very much for being here. We have our Dean that you already heard her, Isabel Aninat, Dean of the Law School at Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Then we are joined by María Agnes Salá. She's the Vice President of the Centro de Arbitraje y Mediación de la Cámara de Comercio de Chile. We also have here Gonzalo Smith. He's the president of Círculo Legal de ICARE. Monica van der Schaft, she is the co-president of the Women's Commission at the Chilean Bar Association. Pablo Guerrero, he's joining us as the president of the Consejo Consultivo of Fundación Pro Bono. And finally, Alejandra Sepúlveda, she's the president of Comunidad Mujer. And all of these institutions have organized together with us Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez and sponsored this activity. We wanted to have this activity. We had Joan here visiting us in June, but we couldn't make it because Joan got sick. But now we are very happy to have you all here. And well, we'll begin this conversation. You can send in Spanish or English as you wish questions through the question and answer box. Pueden mandar sus preguntas en español o en inglés en la sección preguntas y respuestas en la barra abajo de su pantalla y la vamos a ir viendo.
Veronica, I should say that I don't see the translation. So I'll just let you know if I don't understand something. I will probably understand a good bit of it, but not all.
Okay, maybe our translators can help Joan with the bottom.
Let's not delay to do that, but I just wanted you to know that.
I can hear you from the English. Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. Joan, I think that in the bottom of your screen you have to activate Spanish, or you can change from English to Spanish. There is a kind of sign at the bottom.
I totally don't see it.
Okay.
It's like a drawing of a world.
Say it again.
It's like a round sign, like a world.
You find at the
Sign.
bottom is share screen,
Right-
raise
right
hand,
bottom.
record, and interpretation.
Oh, do I share
At the bottom of your screen.
Oh, here we go. Interpretation.
Yes, exactly.
Then you can switch to Spanish.
Oh, shall I switch it to Spanish?
Yes,
Keep
Or
it
to
in
English.
or
To
to
English.
English.
You have to switch to English.
Okay,
There you go.
Okay, good.
I can.
So,
Yes, I can.
well, we have heard a very interesting speech by Joan, and the first thing I want to ask everyone here who knows a lot about how law firms work. So where we are in Chile in this discussion, are we keeping track? Are we using metrics? Are we thinking about gender equality in our law firms? Maybe Monica can help us with that, and maybe Pablo as well.
Sure, I think we are not in a very good position here in Chile. There is not a lot of metric, but if you look for metric, you can find something in the directories like Chambers and Partners, Legal 500, and so on. And if you look there, at least last year, 2021, you can see that 87% of the ranked lawyers, at least in Chambers, were men, and only 13% were women. So that shows that we are not in a very good position. And besides, probably there is not a kind of, some law firms have policies that they try to apply, but it is not standard. So I don't think you will find everywhere a kind of awareness of the situation. And precisely this was one of my questions to Professor Williams. How do you break this inertia? Because I think you can see that there is this bias and this gap between men and women in the law profession, but there is also an inertia about doing something about it. So the only place where I see a kind of real policy is in the judicial power, where they have active policies to bring more women and to promote women careers among the judicial power. And you can see that there the figures have changed in the last 15 years. But in the legal profession, regrettably, it's not the same.
Pablo, would you like to add something?
Well, I think I agree with Monica. Let me say a few words. I think that I agree that there are not many data on which to rely, and basically we have, as Monica said, the directories which show very few women in leadership positions in the firms. And I think at least in the few years we have seen some concern in the legal profession, especially in law firms, about the extremely low level of participation of women in leadership positions. If you see the overall number of women lawyers in law firms, probably there are a lot of women, but they don't get to the leadership positions partnership, basically. I cannot speak for all law firms because I don't know the situation of each one of them, but I can tell you a little bit of what has been their experience in the firm I'm a partner at. And basically, we started working on this topic in 2007 probably, and Alejandra Sepúlveda might remember, because we realized at that time that we had a big problem, that we have a very serious difficulties in retaining women, especially when they started at maternity level. I mean, 4 or 5 years in the firm, and it was very hard to retain women that have been mothers. And what you call the maternal wall was really something that we were concerned about. And we worked with Comunidad Mujer actually and Universidad Católica to try to see what was happening at our firm specifically, why we were not able to retain very good talent, especially when they became mothers. And we devised a lot of, I mean, a whole program to have more flexible time. I mean, one of the things that we found, at least in our firms, that there was this tendency for staying long hours at the firm and valuing being there rather than doing or the outcome of the work. And we did some things to promote or to incentivize flexible time for women, which probably was at the end of the day counterproductive. I think we were very successful in retaining more women, but we were not successful in getting them to become leaders of the firm, to become partners or senior associates. And we started the work again in like 4 or 5 years ago. We set up a committee on gender equality. We hired a new consultant, and the first thing we did this time was to try to gather data, specific data, and try to have metrics on different things. And I think what the best part of your presentation, Joan, is the title. I mean, you can't change what you can't see. And I think having the data was very important for this new stage. And we gathered data on hiring, on performance evaluation, on how we were staffing the projects, how we were assigning the different projects to the lawyers at the firm, and that has been very useful. But as I said, it's something that has started or is in the last 4 or 5 years that we've started to hear in the profession a real concern of what's going on with the firms in terms of leadership of women. I can talk a lot about this, but let's hear someone else.
Gonzalo, you have the view from the client's point. So you had been telling us that you ask your lawyers to bring women to the front. So how do you see, because probably you have contact with many law firms, which is your evaluation of the situation?
Right. Well, thank you very much, Veronica. And thank you, Professor Williams, for your keynote address, which was very enlightening. So I think you see a whole range of things, I would say. So you do see firms that are taking it seriously and that are trying to do things in order to sort of, move the needle on this. And some of those actually do very publicly, which I think is a good thing, because it doesn't only matter what happens indoors in your firm, but also what you show to the rest of the legal community that matters to you. Indeed, we do ask the firms that we work with to proactively work on diversity, and that including, of course, gender equality. And probably some 5 years ago, we started this as being sort of an active conversation in which we would ask firms to actually tell us what they were doing. We would ask them on a yearly basis to tell us what advancements they had done during the last year, the previous year. And as of late, we have started selecting firms and actually selecting them to retain them for specifically work on the basis of them putting forward a partner that was a specialist on the field and that would really lead the team. Because one of the things that we've observed is that actually we asked them to have females on the team, but you soon realize that they were not really the ones who were leading the effort that was, somehow included in the task. So as of late, we've started selecting those that really put forward a partner that was going to lead the matter that we were asking them to do for us. And that's a female partner, of course. And so we are progressively intensifying what we ask firms. But again, you see some really trying. I see also firms dealing with the fact that some of the measures, as much as you may be in very good faith implementing those, they don't really work. And we don't only see them because of the numbers not necessarily changing, but also because of the number of women who actually apply when we have a position. And I would say that in-house legal departments have benefited from this problem at law firms. We have tremendous and great legal talent and applicants to the positions we open, which we're happy to take, because the depth of the talent that we get to retain because is really fantastic. But then again, I'm not saying this because I think that legal departments do a better job, but only because companies generally have a better value proposition in terms of diversity than law firms. So there are other forces at play when it comes to a company, and we benefit from that. I'm not trying to take any credit from this. So that is one thing. I still feel that a number of firms are working this proactively. You see them trying, they reach out to see, to sort of collaborate and ask, what do we do that we believe has worked? And there's a number of things that we share with them. But I would say that progress does not match efforts. That's what I would say. You see people trying, but it's not really changing.
Thank you, Gonzalo. About that, I want to take Monica's questions to you, Joan, and also we have a question from one of our from the public, from Oscar Luarte. He's asking, could you share, Joan? He's asking Joan, Professor Joan Williams, could you share your experience on implementing gender and inclusion policies in the face of resistance from senior management? He says it's an important barrier to overcome. And I also take one sentence you said that when we think that we are very meritocratic, that the companies that think that are very meritocratic, they are the worst. So, and I think that that it's very common for us to think that we are working on very meritocratic places. So how can we, can you share your experience how to deal with this resistance, or at least, and I think that there is still also not only resistance, but not enough interest,
Well, one thing that is remarkably effective at focusing the mind, of course, is lawsuits, like the Pricewaterhouse case. The Pricewaterhouse case really shook up partnerships in the United States when they realized that they could lose a sex discrimination suit because they were either not making very best efforts, or they were trying, as Gonzalo points out, but that the progress they were using ineffective tools. I think it's very difficult to sustain an effective diversity and inclusion initiative without support from upper level management. One of the things that happened in the United States is that in-house counsel did what Gonzalo's doing. They began to condition giving work to law firms, not just on who could show up with a woman who had been roped into a pitch, but was really going to have very little role in the work, but with a woman who was a specialist in the area who would actually lead the matter. Corporate in-house counsel now have also actually got involved to some extent in partner compensation decisions because indirectly by by saying you will not get this this matter unless it's led by a woman and she gets the origination credit. Um, um, so I think in-house counsel, where you have recalcitrant leadership, can play a major role. And I would challenge Gonzalo. This was I mentioned this before, this is an initiative called a call to action, led by in-house counsel in the United States. I also think that very often there's a huge gap in law firms between the top leadership and everybody else. In the United States, 71% of men who earn in the top 1% of household incomes are married to stay-at-home wives. And so what you have is organizations led by men who are married to stay-at-home wives who basically take care of their lives outside of the office, and looking for other people just like them who have everything else in their life taken care of. And that is going to mean that women don't thrive, but it's also, if the United States is anything, if Chile is anything like the United States, you're also losing younger men, because younger men really have changed. Not all of them, but an important group of younger men feel that being a good father means being involved in the daily care of your children, not leaving work at 8 a.m. and coming back at 9 p.m. when the children are asleep. And I think it's confusing for employers because men will leave for work-family reasons, and they will tell you they're leaving for a better job. Women will leave because they're frustrated with lack of career advancement at the firm, and they will tell you they're leaving for work-family reasons. So no wonder the firms think only women care about the work-family issue, because that's the messages they're being sent. But you don't hear from the younger men, but I do. I hear from the younger men who are leaving for these reasons. And the first question I ask anybody any firm who tells me they're interested in addressing the maternal wall problem is not a question about women. It's a question about whether your men have equal access to parental leave and whether they're taking all of their leaves. Because I think it's very unusual in Chile for the men to take pretty much any leave at all. And if that's true, what Pablo said was really important. You can help women just as a special case, but it's not going to work. You will just further marginalize the women. You have to realize that the people often who are leading the law firms have a different family form than younger generations are going to have, and that younger generations are going to demand. And so you have to change those workplace norms for everybody. The other thing I just wanted to pick up with what Pablo said is, if you're keeping track of who is getting access to high quality assignments, I just want to highlight how important that is, because my experience, which is very limited, I acknowledge, in Chile, is that firms leave women at about their 3rd to 6th year. And they say, oh, well, we can't keep them because they just want to have children, and women's priorities change when they have children. It's not our fault. But what's happening is those women are being caught in a pincer between seeing that they don't have a path to partnership anyway because they're stuck doing the office housework and working away from the house 60, 70 hours. And they go like, life is too short. This is not worth it. And so it's very important to address both the motherhood issue and the lack of access to the kind of work that's going to lead to partnership at once. And so I'm pleased to hear that that some firms are doing that. And I hear you, Monica, about the inertia. I mean, I have to say that when I heard that fewer than 10% of law firm partners in Chile are women, I was really shocked in 2022. This is a very low number.
Pablo, your
No, I just want to say something. That's a higher number than board members in public companies in Chile. So it's I don't want to treat this as an excuse, but we have a cultural problem in Chile as well. I mean, and that translates into, I mean, the attitude that Gonzalo is taking as general counsel of an international or multinational company in Chile is probably not the general norm for all Chilean companies, because they cannot say the same, or they're not an example either. I mean, there are industries where probably the participation of women is even less than the legal profession, which is like I would say, for example, in the financing industry in Chile. So it's a country problem as well. That's I was gonna say.
I think it's a
I'm
country
sure that-
problem, but if I can jump in, Veronica, Gonzalo has a counterexample, because when Gonzalo in his legal department put in a true no questions asked access to remote work and flexible work for everybody, not because of motherhood, no questions asked, and it was taken by both men and women, he was flooded with applications. He was flooded with talent. So no doubt there's a cultural problem, but there's also a lack of, I'm not speaking about any firm in particular, but there's a lack of business acumen in not following a short path to stealing a disproportionate amount of the talent. And so in a sense, the cultural problem presents the business opportunity for the company that is really going to address this effectively.
Yeah, Alejandra, I'm sure that you have a lot to say here, because Comunidad Mujer is doing a lot of, had been doing for the last years, a lot of consultative work, not only for law firms, but other companies as well. And I also, so please give us your assessment of the situation, but also I want to take one of the questions from the chat. It's about, it's two questions. One is about flexible working hours for women. One of the problems, someone who is called with her or his initials MFB, he or she says, from my point of view, in Chilean law firms, the most common mistake is giving women flexible working hours, usually reducing the target of billable hours, but the firm keeps measuring in quantity and not quality or efficiency in those billable hours. So he or she asked Professor Joan Williams about this, and are there tools to change this model? But maybe you can address that too. Joan can do it later. And also we have another question about, do quotas are a good idea or not? So, a lot to...
Sí. Bueno, yo voy a hablar en español porque soy más fluida y puedo expresar mejor mis ideas. Yo creo que ha habido un cambio y una evolución, y quiero decir aquí también de comunidad mujer incluso, porque es cierto que inicialmente, hace una década atrás, hablábamos de conciliación vida y trabajo, y pensábamos cómo facilitarle la vida y la integración vida y trabajo a las mujeres, work-life balance, pero hoy día estamos absolutamente convencidas de que las políticas tienen que orientarse en el tema que estamos hablando de los hijos y de las responsabilidades familiares hacia la corresponsabilidad. Y eso quiere decir que si uno visualiza las estrategias sobre todo de retención y de promoción, desde ese paradigma de la corresponsabilidad, las políticas tienen que ir igualmente para hombres y para mujeres, asumiendo que la sociedad se compone de trabajadores y trabajadoras con responsabilidades familiares. Entonces, una política de flexibilidad solo para las mujeres es una mala idea. Hoy día tienen que ser pensados para que ambos, hombres y mujeres, puedan integrar familia y trabajo, y no solo familia y trabajo, también familia y vida personal, porque hay personas que pueden no tener hijos, pero sí pueden tener padres o madres dependientes, cada uno en sus distintas realidades. Entonces creo que ese es un statement súper importante, y no solo para las firmas de abogados y abogadas, sino que para el mercado laboral en general. Eso es muy importante. Y también creo, respecto a lo que ustedes han conversado, hemos ido observando, a veces participando en las iniciativas que han hecho algunos estudios de abogados. Creo que ha habido mucho avance o intentos de crear comités de diversidad e inclusión. Quiero decir que la mayoría de las veces impulsados o liderados por mujeres que quieren mover la aguja o los límites en sus organizaciones. También bastante la conversación respecto a los bias, pero probablemente lo que todavía no está instalado en todas las oficinas de abogados es la institucionalización de esas políticas de género. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? Como decía muy bien Joan en su estudio, respecto a la contratación, a la retención, a la promoción, con qué metas, con qué planes hacia adelante. Y yo creo que en eso una estrategia válida y probablemente que lograría acelerar los procesos son las acciones afirmativas, son las cuotas. Sobre todo cuando tú quieres cambiar la composición de un directorio o del senior level, efectivamente, si solamente dejas todo a que se desarrolle el pipeline, te vas a demorar mucho tiempo. Eso también hay que hacerlo, pero es importante generar ¿cómo le podría decir? Un fast track, una manera más rápida para que las mujeres puedan llegar. Y eso obviamente se contradice a veces con la meritocracia pura, pero también hay que asimilar y hay que asumir que si las mujeres no están arriba, no es porque no tengan méritos suficientes, es porque hay un entorno que genera muchas barreras para su ascenso y promoción.
Veronica?
María Agnes,
Thank you.
I wanted to call on you now, but
Thank you. Now, related to the quotas and the questions that they have asked in this regard, I wanted to ask Professor Williams that the following: when positive actions are or have been taken to revert the low participation of female lawyers in certain areas, you can usually hear in Chile two critiques that are very common. First, there is some questioning from the perspective of equality. And second, it is raised that merit could be sacrificed in favor of numbers. Certainly, to me, those critiques, of course, are not correct in the sense that they are taking a formal account of equality and not a substantial one. And they disregard that there is plenty of room for positive actions without the sacrifice of quality. So my question to Professor Williams is, what advice would you give us to promote affirmative measures that go beyond formal equality, of course, in order to avoid or to contain such type of unjustified criticism that you can often hear in the legal areas? I think it's even more common than in other areas.
Before you answer, Joan, I have a question for you, Maggie, that you can take after Joan answers your question, because first, you are a very accomplished lawyer. You work in one of the main law firms in Chile. Now you are a very accomplished law professor, and also a very good prestigious arbitrator. But also you have another quality, which is that everyone wants to talk to you and everyone tells you their stories. So you have heard a lot of women talking about these issues. You are a big year for many women's lawyers. So I want you, because we'll go to more specific questions on hiring, promotion, etc. So I want you maybe to gather some of what you have heard and tell us what women are saying about the barriers they encounter. Yeah. But now we are going back to Joan.
Okay, I would, Maria Agnes, that's such an important point, because the point that diversity initiatives corrode and jeopardize meritocracy and quality, that's always there, whether people are saying it explicitly or not. And I think the point that the data that you just saw shows is that actually there's one slide that I didn't show, and this is a slide from, again, Lawyers in the United States. 87% of white men, if I remember correctly, said they had fair access to career enhancing opportunities. Only 53% of women of color agreed. And in our 18,000 people database, it's extremely consistent. 80 to 90% of white men say they have fair access to career enhancing assignments. What that means is that they feel like they exist in just one thing, just a second. Sorry, my office insists on turning off the light for reasons best known to machines, not to human beings. So it seems that the law is operating as a meritocracy for white men in the United States, and they report that it is. But it is not operating as a meritocracy for women or people of color in the United States. And what that means is that law as a whole is not a meritocracy. It is a meritocracy for a small segment of the population, and it's not a meritocracy for everyone else. So I think it's very important to explain that we are trying to defend a meritocracy that does not exist. And I think that's why, I don't know, Alejandra, I may be conservative on this, but I don't endorse the idea of a fast track for women. I think we have to do the hard task of eliminating the bias that women face every single day, because they cannot be heard in meetings without being seen as a difficult woman, because they don't get access to opportunities, because men are promoted to partnership on their potential, whereas a woman has to have shown that she can get clients and already has them in her pocket. Men get assignments based on potential, whereas women, she doesn't have the right skill set yet, and so she never gets it. Those are the kinds of things we have to do, because I think we have to create a true meritocracy where none exists now. And in some ways, that's a difficult message for people to hear, but the data is really clear. This profession is a meritocracy, but only for one group.
Thank you. Maria Agnes, back to you, and then Gonzalo and Monica raised their hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to say one thing with respect to Alejandra. She also made a super important point, which is that very often the way that firms are approaching this is they appoint a diversity committee, which is headed by women, which is not valued when it comes to partnership and doesn't count in terms of billable hours. They basically are turning diversity into a form of office housework that just serves to stall women's progress. If you are serious about diversity, you are going to have your human resource people keeping metrics and collecting data and doing evidence-based changes to your hiring, to your promotions, to your retention, you're not going to be expecting women to do it on their spare time.
Okay.
Yes. No, I think that reading the report of Joan is an activity that I would really suggest to any law firm or legal institution that really wants to engage in a proper way in these matters, because all that you can read in that report is true for the Chilean experience. All these classifications of administrative versus glamorous work, the maternal wall, the differences in qualifications, all the biases that you see every time, and that you hear all of the lawyers of our country complaining about. I think that women in general terms feel very underestimated in their skills. That is very common that they feel. But at the same time, they feel that there are no consequences for the lack of participation of women. I love to hear Gonzalo when he says that he really it's music for my ears to see the measures that he have taken in his professional life, but it's not really common, and therefore it's like everything gets diluted in nothing. So I think that at some point it's like a sad sensation for women in this type of matters. Yes.
Gonzalo?
Thank you, Veronica. Yes, so
we
honestly,
don't have much time, so please.
I know. Okay, I'll try to be quick. So first thing, I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't intend or pretend to be the poster child of diversity or gender equality in the profession. But what I would like to mention is that this is really about what you want to do, not in the profession, but with the profession, and whether you see that you have a role when you're in a leadership position to make a change that really matters to society as a whole. Gender diversity or gender equality is not a female issue. It attaches and it matters both to men and women. I have a wife, I have 2 daughters, and really I'm interested in making a change, because what happens to them matters to me. So there's even selfish, very close relationships that should make you make a change. What I wanted to say, is this: there are biases, there are structural issues or problems, but if what has worked for us is trying not to address the obstacles that females face themselves, but to broaden the question of how do you enable and unlock potential and talent to everyone that is working within your organization. And every single one of those individuals has a reason why they either want to work differently or they want to work from a different place. And if you don't ask questions and you open these types of programs to everyone, you will see, as we had, that some people took it because they were athletes and they wanted to train for a marathon or a triathlon. Actually, the actual example that we had was someone who did pole vault. Some other people were divorced and they needed to pick up the children, at lunchtime, go to school and pick them up. If you don't ask questions, people will not feel embarrassed about asking for this special arrangement. And that sort of drove women in because of the things they wanted to do. We didn't ask whether they were married or had kids. Some did it because they needed to work from home, because they would, double task with their kids in there. Some of them because they needed a longer maternity leave. Some of them did it because they just wanted to take, painting classes. And that is a subject that matters to all of us. I mean, this is really about how do you balance not only work-life balance, but your personal interest as a whole. And work has become so invasive of our private lives that I think it is time that we try to, seek ways of doing the opposite. How do you permeate your work with your work-life balance, style, life choices? That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Monica, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Joan, first of all, thank you for this marvelous concept of promoting meritocracy as an answer to the comment that promoting women may go against meritocracy. I think it's a beautiful answer for such comments. And second, my main concern is that I understand that we have to travel this path and that changes come slowly, but my concern is that I probably will not see in my professional life the change, and I don't know where my 17-year-old daughter will see it. So my question is, how do we get start changing? Which is this kickoff that will change the whole system? Because my belief is that we have to focus on figures, because this shows the truth. This shows reality, and also we have to be very careful about this kind of illusion that because some women came to the top, this is a kind of standard, because that it's also an answer that you get that, look, Jane Doe, she did it, so everybody can. No, that's not true. If you go back to figures, that is not true. It is not what happened. But my question is, what can we do to start with the change?
And your question is the same as Constanza Lichtenberg question.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to pick that up as well.
Yes.
Starting with Constanza, who in the chat said, how should we gather data so that people can see this? People aren't going to jeopardize their jobs by telling everyone they were discriminated against. It's a really good point. The companies that do our workplace experiences survey are attentive to privacy so that people give their comments anonymously. And if people give their comments anonymously, they will tell you. We don't ask whether they're discriminated against or draw any legal conclusions. We just ask, I feel like I have to prove myself more than my colleagues of similar education and experience. And if you ask them, they will tell you. But more to the point, and this goes back to Monica's question as well, there are very specific metrics that people should be keeping track of, not by asking people whether they experience discrimination. That's kind of a mushy thing. But counting on your performance evaluations, for example, whether men are promoted with lower scores than women are. If you're not looking at that, it's probably happening. Whether men are being hired with lower scores on interviews than women. If you're not looking, it's probably happening. If women are not getting job offers because they are badgered in interviews until they lose their patience, and then they're written off as a difficult woman. Whereas if a man did that, he would be seen as, well, the English expression is, he doesn't suffer fools lightly. He doesn't tolerate fools. But a woman who does the same is a difficult woman who got hysterical. If you're not keeping track of all of those things, which are not self-reports of discrimination, they are evidence-based, objective evidence of bias. And if you're not keeping track of it, probably all of it's happening, which is why, just to highlight the importance of what Pablo is doing at his firm, when he's keeping track of whose house projects are being staffed and whether the women are getting equal access to the glamorous work, those are the kinds of objective metrics that can really move the needle. And just to give one example, this law firm that's featured on the Bias Interrupters website, we analyzed their performance evaluations. And if you read their performance evaluations one by one, it didn't look like they were biased. But when you crunch the numbers, we found that, for example, 18% of the women had comments on their performance evaluations to the effect that they didn't want to make partner. They hadn't said anything. It was just the assumption that they didn't want to make partner because they had small kids, for example. And so we worked with the firm. We did two very simple things. We helped them change the evaluation form. So people were rated based on competencies with at least 3 pieces of evidence. And then we helped them design a 1-hour training. And we had completely dramatic results in 1 year's time. First of all, only one woman in the entire firm was asked, received a comment she didn't want to make partner because someone had asked her that, and she said that. And secondly, on the leadership, I mentioned that people of only 9.5% of the people of color in the first year had leadership mentioned in their performance evaluations. That was over 70 percentage points lower than white women. In year 2, 100% of people of color had leadership mentioned, and that predicted promotion. So the idea, I hear your impatience and Monica, firms could change this next year. If they start keeping the data and start using evidence-based tools, this could be transformed in 3 or 5 years' time. There are effective tools. That's why Walmart.com gave us between $500,000 and $1 million to show that this works, because the early proof of concept shows that you can solve this problem. The tools do exist.
Alejandra wanted to say something, but before that, I want to ask Pablo. Do you think that we can change this in the next 5 years? Do you think that we can do something? Of course, from Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez we will be doing our best to promote this and to help law firms to do something. But do you think that that senior partners at law firms, or that we can create a kind of movement among senior partners at law firms to move this and to look for more tools? For example, I think that Joan's report and her speech has helped to show that there much more to do than just having, for example, some kind of mentorship programs or things like that. How do you envision this? Do you think that we can do more? And then I will go to Alejandra, and then we'll have to close because we're finishing.
Veronica, I think that there are a lot of things that can be done, and many things prove effective. There is trial and error here. I mean, there are things that you think that will work and eventually don't, but I also think there are things that are effective. In fact, you talk about senior partners. I mean, you cannot generalize. I mean, there are a bunch of those. I mean, all kinds of those. I think the biggest problem are those that, I don't think that there are partners that do not care about gender equality, but many think that we don't have a problem. We are meritocratic. We don't discriminate anything. So what I always tell them when they tell me that is, well, when you toss a coin 20 times and you get tails 19 or 20 times, the problem is the coin. It's not just bad luck. And I think that's something. But you have to predicate here and try to convince everybody about the importance of having a balanced work environment. Having said that, and I probably nobody will agree. I mean, not everybody will agree with me with what I'm going to say. I don't think quotas is the solution, although I do believe that generally in affirmative actions in many things. I don't know. Here is not that easy because becoming a partner unless you bring in a woman as partner, making partner someone who's not in a position to become partner, just to have a quota, I think can be counterproductive. What you have to do is try to have people, I mean, a lot of women in position to become partners according to the partnership track that you have in your firm. And I think at least that's the effort that we are trying to accomplish, having enough women in a position to apply for partnership and become partners, rather than just putting a quota or a fixed number. And I want to say something about what you say about the evaluation of performance and experience that we had. We realized when we started analyzing the data in our firm that women tended to be evaluated not too good and not too bad. If you saw the average, they were very similar to men. But the problem is that partners and leaders come from the very excellent, from those that you consider exceptional, and there were very few women there. I mean, and part of what we did is what Professor Williams said, that we changed our what we were evaluating, and we were discussing our evaluation process. Because of that, we realized that the average was not that bad, but the excellence were mostly men, and the partners normally come from those that you consider excellent. And probably you are evaluating certain characteristics that are more of a man than of woman. That's my opinion.
Can I just jump in for 1 minute, Veronica? That may be because the women weren't as good. It may be because of prove it again bias, that the women were being held to higher standards.
Absolutely.
Alejandra? Alejandra?
You're mute.
Perdón. No, yo quería aclarar mi concepto del fast track, porque lo que quise decir con eso es que, y aplicándolo en general a las distintas industrias, probablemente las oficinas de abogados tienen sus propias particularidades para lograr que una mujer o las personas sean asociadas. Pero creo que las cuotas, estoy convencida de que las cuotas aceleran procesos que de otra manera llevan mucho tiempo en concretarse, y la prueba en Chile, la prueba o lo que ejemplifica mayormente eso es, por ejemplo, en el segundo gobierno de la presidenta Michelle Bachelet se propuso una cuota voluntaria para el sistema de empresas públicas, para los directorios de 40%, y finalmente esa cuota se fue manteniendo en los distintos gobiernos, y hoy día existen directorios de 20 empresas públicas ligadas al CEP que tienen más del 40% de mujeres, y ha sido un gran caso muy positivo, porque además esas mujeres han ido logrando que a niveles gerenciales también ese equilibrio cambie, por distintas razones, por temas de orientación en las políticas de recursos humanos, pero también por los modelos de rol, etc. Entonces quiero decir que en ese sentido yo defiendo que es un proceso que puede ayudar a acelerar la presencia de mujeres en los mayores cargos. Pero sí también creo que hay procesos que no se pueden acelerar, y uno de esos es cómo tú vas desarrollando tu pipeline, y ahí solamente comentar que durante 4 años Comunidad Mujer tuvo a cargo la iniciativa de paridad de género, junto con el BID y con el Foro Económico Mundial, y precisamente lo que logramos hacer es lo mismo que hoy día se está hablando, en el fondo, en el sentido de ojalá tener un modelo de medición, con un cuestionario, con preguntas objetivas, cuantitativas y cualitativas, que permita poder evaluar en qué posición está cada una de estas firmas en los indicadores base, que siempre son brecha salarial, presencia en altos cargos, etcétera, pero también en otros que son cuantitativos. Y eso hay que medirlo siempre y cada cierto tiempo, porque es una forma también de apoyar avances y poder diseñar planes de acción que tengan metas bien concretas. Entonces, en ese sentido es una muy buena idea, y todas las buenas prácticas que se muestran como interruptores o sea, para interrumpir los sesgos en el estudio de Joan, son muy, muy atingentes a la conversación. Eso quería aclarar. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Para todas las personas que están escuchando, las invitamos a leer y a compartir este informe que Joan presentó sobre interrupción de sesgos, que Joan presentó en su presentación, y ese es un informe que se puede bajar gratuitamente, el resumen ejecutivo de internet, pero se puede comprar, tiene más de 150 páginas, aquí lo tengo. You can change what you can't see. Y también está disponible para bajarlo en línea, y como dijo Joan, también en el sitio web sobre Interrupting Bias o Bias Interrupters. Hay muchas distintas herramientas que se pueden bajar y ver gratuitamente. Hay otras a las que se puede acceder también pagando, pero el mensaje es que lo que hemos hablado es solo la superficie, pero hay muchas más herramientas que son muy prácticas, muy específicas, y que pueden realmente implementarse, como dice Joan, al día siguiente, algunas de ellas en el plazo de un año, otras, y que podrían, si es que realmente nos ponemos a trabajar, podrían cambiar el panorama de la situación de los estudios jurídicos y de otras compañías en Chile en estas materias. Muchas gracias, Joan. Ahora le voy a pasar la palabra a nuestra decana, que va a contar cuáles son los planes de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez en estas iniciativas hacia el futuro. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Verónica. Thank you, Joan, for being here with us. Probablemente podríamos seguir hablando mucho rato más. Creo que sin duda ha sido un espacio de reflexión. Hemos tenido muchas preguntas, pero yo diría también muchas ideas, muchas propuestas concretas, y quiero agradecer muy especialmente a quienes nos han acompañado. Como Facultad de Derecho, como decía al inicio, queremos continuar aportando en este tema. Hemos visto durante esta sesión que hay múltiples desafíos por abordar. Quizás este seminario ha sido una pequeña muestra de muchas más cuestiones que influyen en la toma de decisiones, y por lo mismo es que queremos continuar generando un lugar para compartir mejores prácticas y para invitar a la reflexión basada en la evidencia. Por lo mismo es que hemos acordado con la Escuela de Periodismo y de Comunicaciones de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, y en especial con el Laboratorio de Encuestas y Análisis Social, LEAS, de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, el desarrollo de un índice de género en la profesión legal, de manera que nos permita hacer seguimiento y sobre todo aportar con evidencia para el desarrollo de las políticas efectivas. Quizás una cuestión que apareció en la conversación varias veces fue justamente lo crucial que es contar con información, con datos, con métricas, ¿no es cierto?, que nos permita fijar la conversación, medir dónde estamos, dónde están las brechas principales y cuáles son, a partir de eso, ¿no es cierto?, las políticas más efectivas. Por eso es que este índice lo que queremos es construirlo junto con los estudios jurídicos y con los principales espacios de la profesión legal. Es un trabajo que daremos inicio ahora, en las próximas semanas, de manera a desarrollar las primeras mediciones y que iremos poniendo a disposición. Esperamos también continuar fomentando la conversación entre el mundo académico y la profesión legal, con el objetivo, por supuesto, de afinar el diagnóstico, pero sobre todo de acortar de manera efectiva las brechas de género. No me quiero alargar más, pero quiero terminar por agradecer. Hay muchas personas a quienes agradecer en esta tarde. Quiero partir por agradecer muy especialmente a quienes están tras bambalinas, especialmente a Francisca, a Paula y a María José, quienes han trabajado enormemente para hacer este seminario posible. Quiero agradecer muy especialmente a María Agnes, a Mónica, a Alejandra, a Pablo y a Gonzalo, y a las organizaciones que representan, ¿no es cierto?, el Colegio de Abogados, ICARE, el Centro de Arbitraje y Mediación, Comunidad Mujer y Fundación Pro Bono, por hacer esta conversación posible, por sumarse con energía y con entusiasmo a este grupo. Quiero agradecer muy especialmente a nuestro media partner Diario Financiero por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Y quiero agradecer especialmente a Joan Williams por estar aquí con nosotros a la distancia, por liderar esta conversación y especialmente por aportar con ideas concretas y con evidencia a esta discusión. So, thank you, Joan.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Y finalmente, antes de terminar, yo quisiera hacer un especial reconocimiento a la profesora Verónica Undurraga, académica de nuestra facultad, quien, debo decir, ha liderado desde los orígenes este proyecto, fue quien trajo la idea, quien generó este grupo de trabajo, que de seguro se va a mantener en el tiempo, y quien ha perseverado en ello a pesar de múltiples retos, desafíos, dificultades, y que nos tiene aquí, ¿no es cierto?, a todos reunidos. Así es que el mérito, Verónica, es tuyo. Muchas gracias y que tengan una muy buena tarde.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.